The action of this funny and interesting story takes place in the Kingdom of the Swordsman, in the Eastern Wasteland, where the attack on the city took place. One of the attackers threw the students back and said that their clan could not do anything against this phantom transformation. Times had changed. Now these lands would belong to their blood clan. The wounded student shouted that the villain should not talk nonsense because he had already informed Brother Alan, and when he came, none of them would leave. 5 terrifying masters towered over the students, and one of them said that he did not know anyone among the best students of the Sword Clan with that name. Apparently he is not even among the top 10, and if he dares to fight the Great 5 of the Blood Clan, he will be finished. A man with a terrible scarlet aura said that he should come here and collect the corpses of the students. After these words, the huge red projection that the villain summoned punched the student. Suddenly, an unknown guy rushed towards the threat at the speed of a cheetah. The scarlet fist was immediately blocked by his skills. The unknown villain in the hat was surprised that someone was able to block his attack. 2 students who were preparing for death rejoiced that they were saved, and the third of them shouted that it was Brother Alan. Brother Alan, a long-haired man with blue eyes and a powerful chi aura inspiring calm, was glad that he had time. The villain laughed when he saw that same unknown sword fighter. He asked if the guy was looking for death, and his projection began to create a powerful scarlet sphere for attack. But Alan immediately struck the monster with one light blow of his sword and stopped all his attempts to hit the enemy. Instantly, the entire Great 5 from the Blood Clan received colossal injuries and were defeated. A few moments later they were all lying at Alan's feet unconscious. Apparently it was all over for them. Unnoticed by the others, a strange scarlet sphere rolled from one of the 5 masters. Alan asked the students if everything was okay, and they thanked him for his help. Alan asked Brother Steve if he told him not to do anything because if he didn't have time, they would have died, to which Steve replied that this would be a lesson for him. But these masters sacrificed 1,000 monks just so that refined the blood soul pearl, and therefore he could not sit idly by. Alan advised the guy not to listen to the clan's tales. Let him do what he can and live an ordinary life. This is the best path to improvement for his generation. Suddenly, the student noticed how the scarlet pearl began to emit purple ominous smoke and head towards Alan. An elder of the Blood Clan emerged from it, and asked who dared to speak out against his students. He then attempted to attack our hero with the fist of ghostly comprehension. Steve recognized him and shouted that he was the master of the 7th level of the Purple Palace. But Alan was already preparing for a new battle, drawing his invincible sword from its sheath. The blade of the blade shone with a blue light, and immediately multiple cuts of the sword rushed towards the master. Alan's power was able to stop the elder's ghostly hand. The master was surprised that someone was actually able to stop his attack. He thought about it, and said that Alan was a good fighter, and it would be a pity to even kill such a person. The villain invited Alan to join them because their clan has always respected the strong. He will make him his #1 student and support the guy. Besides, their clan is full of treasures and beauties. Alan answered the elder that he had heard that they work from early morning until late at night, eat and sleep in the open air, and are constantly hunted. On their way to improvement, they kill each other because they only care about their own benefit. To which the master replied that they don't have many rules, and the discipline is lame, but their main principle is that the more you work, the more you get. Alan laughed at the phrase the more you work, the more you get. At their sword school, working hours are regulated, and besides, he has been here for a long time and sincerely enjoys the time he spends here. Therefore, he will never join them. After these words the guy used his sword technique, which cuts everything in its path. The master tried to hold back such a powerful attack, but he had difficulty doing it. Ultimately, Alan's sword technique won and a huge explosion was heard, signaling the swordsman's victory. Steve rejoiced at the guy's victory and asked if he did the right thing by calling him here for help. The other disciples couldn't believe their eyes. It was impossible that their clan's initial level of swordsmanship could be so powerful. The cut-up demon, who lay without strength, asked Alan why he didn't want to join them. The guy replied that he had worked hard for many years, so he knew in advance what he would tell him. The master dared to hang noodles on his ears and thereby doomed himself to these humiliations. Suddenly, a strange sphere rose from the master's body, emitting a purple, ominous aura. The sphere flew up to Alan's hands and whispered in a quiet voice for the guy to finish off the elder. Then the strange artifact flew away at the speed of sound. Alan did not understand what happened, but assumed that the master's spirit had left the body and was trying to hide. He readied his energy-charged sword and was ready to go in pursuit of the soul. However, suddenly the guy heard the disgusting sound of an alarm clock. The hero stopped, took his watch out of his cloak and began to look at it. After that, to the surprise of the other students, he turned around and said that the main mission was completed, and he was leaving. One of the students could not believe that Brother Alan would simply allow the soul of the elder of such a powerful clan to escape. Suddenly Steve started telling other students about Alan that they didn't understand something. The fact is that Brother Alan practices the 9-to-5 method. He pointed to the sun setting behind the mountain, which meant that time was up. This means that it is now the end of Alan's working day. What irritated Alan most was that at the end of the working day he still had a lot of work left, and he was practically forced to work overtime. The next day we are transported to the residence of the swordsman clan. Here warriors train to control their blades, which they can use to fly if they focus enough chakra. In order to be strong, they train hard every day. But not everyone is such a hard worker. One of the students turned around and looked at the one who was again lazy and doing nothing. He didn't understand how the elders even accepted a student like this guy. It was Alan, who was sleeping peacefully under a tree while others were training tirelessly. The noise of the warriors woke up the guy, and he reluctantly began to stretch and wake up. He took off his blindfold to look at his comrades. Alan returned after midnight, so he didn't get much sleep. If he had known about everything in advance, he would not have been the one to put such troublesome tasks on his shoulders. Up to this point, he had been continuously working overtime for 5 years. 996. The 996 work schedule is an unofficial work schedule from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. His boss shouted at the guy from morning to night that he was lazy, and that he should continue working until he finished, and not even think about leaving. As a result, the guy lost consciousness and his colleagues told the boss to call an ambulance. But he said that first let the guy finish the project. Suddenly Alan died and accidentally ended up in this fantasy world. Here he is a simple student of the swordsman clan, and finally he has a second chance to change everything. But other students, just like in his previous life, tell him to work hard and not stop for sleep, because a student of his age should devote himself to practice, not sleep. Everyone around tells the guy that he is lazy and they have never seen such a lazy person. But he decided, so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past, he would never work overtime in this world. But the guy didn't expect that even here he would stand out so much. Suddenly someone distracted him from his memories by calling his name. It was Steve who told Alan that the elder was looking for him. He wanted to ask him about the details of yesterday's mission. Alan asked if Steve had told him anything about him. The enthusiastic student replied that the master had already called them to talk. But no one said a word about Alan's strength. The eternal lazy man replied that this was very good and next time the guy would teach Steve a couple of techniques. The student immediately blushed and thanked his brother in arms. Alan used his magic sword and headed towards the elder's palace. After some time, he arrived at the main hall. In this world, improvement is divided into 6 stages. From the lowest to the highest they go in order: chakra improvement, the realm of the spirit. Then the formation of the soul is the limit of the palace of the immortals, sealing one's power. And the last stages are called the purple palace, and then the ascent to truth. Each of these stages is divided into 9 levels, but there is someone more serious than all these stages. This is the head of the sword clan, Reynold, the 6th level of ascension to truth. The mightiest of this world are called his elemental sword god. Alan waved to Reynold and said good morning to the elder. The powerful warrior looked at the guy with a merciless gaze and told him not to forget where he was. At that moment, Alan took a box out of his pocket and said that this was tea that he had planted and that it had ripened a couple of days ago. This information blew Reynolds' mind. He immediately approached Alan like a child and began to beg him to let him try his new tea. Who would have thought that the god of the elemental sword, Reynold, is madly in love with tea? Alan used his old knowledge of growing succulents and other plants to develop the best variety of tea, which helped him build a good relationship with the elder. But this is a must for any self-respecting employee. His thoughts were interrupted by an elder who was hiding tea in his sleeve. He asked how yesterday's mission went. Some students said that it was Alan who saved them. The guy looked away and replied that it happened completely by accident. He then took out a strange sphere and said that he took it from one of the disciples of another clan. Reynold immediately understood what this sphere was. It was a blood pearl. He took it from his student and asked if Alan knew what kind of artifact it was and what power it had. Reynold looked at the guy with a serious look and began his story, but Alan immediately waved it off and began shouting that he didn't know anything and didn't want to hear it, and that in general he wasn't interested in it all. He tried to run away, saying that if he had nothing more to say to his master, then he went about his business. Alan wanted to spend this life carefree, so let the elder leave these troubles to someone else. But the master ordered him to stop. Reynold shouted that Alan should listen when the elder spoke, and even though the guy had succeeded in growing tea, as a true student he could not be so passive. The master wanted to know why the guy did not take part in the sword training last week. Alan replied that he would then have to wait an hour until it was his turn, and the master should know that Alan has his own principles in training, so he needs to be understood. Reynold objected, shouting that because he missed class, all the masters came to him to complain, and they all unanimously asked to demote Alan from the students. The guy calmly turned around and asked if they really said that. Reynold thought that he was too harsh with him, and should have said it more carefully. However, Alan was only glad to hear these words, because if he was demoted to an internal disciple, no one would bother him anymore. Alan asked the elder when he would demote him, and Reynold's patience was already reaching its limit. And then he exploded and shouted that in the entire history of the clan there was not a single precedent like this. If Alan was demoted it would be tantamount to a slap in the face to his elder. The guy replied that he didn't know that something so wonderful would happen. Suddenly, someone behind the guy called his name, and Reynold was glad that she had finally come. The girl went to Alan and said that tens of thousands of students work day and night to become true students. But for some reason, only Brother Alan is ready to give up this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This beauty's name was Hannah, and she was the true #1 disciple of the Sword Clan. Even in her early years, she achieved great success in cultivation, and since then she has been ranked first among the disciples. She is called the future of the Sword Clan, and she was also very beautiful. Meanwhile, Alan takes 55th place, which is the clan's last place. The guy said that his sister doesn't know, but he has been stuck in the Purple Palace for a long time. So Alan decided to start over as an inner student. Re-strengthen your spirit, break through the limit of the Palace of Immortality and become stronger, because the one who repeats everything 10,000 times becomes the strongest. Hannah replied that she didn't think he would be so progressive and think so deeply about ways to improve. It was different from what she had heard about him. The girl bowed down and said that she was wrong, and meanwhile the master was watching this performance that Alan staged. Reynold interrupted their conversation and said that the reason the guy was here was because several masters wanted to make a request to him. Alan turned warily and asked what the masters wanted from him. They want him to go on a mission with Hannah and learn how to work hard from her best student. This was the worst thing Alan could imagine. It seemed to him that the elder was mocking him. It was Hannah who, through her hyperactivity, doomed the entire clan to live up to her standards. He and Alan were completely different people, and the guy believed that they could not work together. Reynolds said that the girl is the best student and people line up to her for advice every day, and the guy is also dissatisfied that he had such a wonderful opportunity to study. Alan replied that he was simply worried that he was not good enough for this mission and would interfere with his sister's improvement. He turned to the girl and, with a calm expression, asked her to confirm his words that she did not want the guy to interfere. Hannah, on the contrary, shouted to the guy not to worry about it. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, and she said that their entire clan was family, and they should support each other and make progress together. In addition, Brother Alan can use this opportunity to prove himself and destroy the rumors that other people are spreading about him. Alan was gripped by fear. The guy thought that they were trying to intimidate him because he didn't want to suffer like she did. Then he used another trick. The guy folded his hands in a sign of humility. He stood in front of the elder and said that if he took part in this mission, his tea leaves would be left without sensitive supervision. The elder even invited Hannah so that Alan could take part in this mission, but he did not intend to deviate from his principles. He had no reason to go with her when he could play the fool just fine here. Suddenly the enraged master raised his hand, making a strange gesture. Reynolds said that if Alan successfully completed this task, he would give him 3 days off. 3 days off, these words echoed in the guy's head. A whole 3-day weekend. One could only dream about it. Alan immediately grabbed the master's hand as a sign of gratitude. His eyes glowed with enthusiasm, and he asked the elder to immediately inform him of the contents and location of the mission. He will go through fire, water and copper pipes to complete it, and meanwhile the master only sighed in disappointment. A quarter of a day later, Hannah worked hard to master the techniques. Alan, meanwhile, was yawning after a deep sleep. He approached the training girl and said that she was training very hard. Hannah, meanwhile, was angry with the guy because he was late. Alan answered her that if he did not sleep at lunchtime, he would not have any strength for the battle. The girl began to scold him, saying that he should devote more time to practice. So she, for example, came here on time and managed to make 3,000 swings of the sword. But Alan, it turns out, needs sleep like an ordinary person. He is too weak. The guy said that she was right and that he would think about everything at his leisure, and then give his best at the next training session with double strength. But in fact he was only thinking about the fact that Hannah was grumbling like an old woman. The girl exhaled in disappointment, and said that they didn't have time for this, and it was time to move out. At that same second, our new team rushed to the mission site. While they were flying to the place, Hannah asked Alan what he thought about the mission, to which he replied that the elder had sent them to investigate the disappearances of people in the mountains, and this mountain range was located right next to the sacrificed village. Alan suspected that the disappearance was not accidental at all. Hannah agreed with him. The inspired girl encouraged the guy, telling him not to worry. Given his level, she would protect him. Alan looked at her and thanked her happily. He didn't think that Hannah would be a person he could rely on. The guy thought that he had hit the jackpot and would get a 3-day weekend and make friends with the beauty. Alan mentally thanked the elder, and they set off on their mission. Towards evening, the team reached the mountains where people disappear. The girl told Brother Alan that they first needed to ask the local residents, and Alan, meanwhile, was looking for something in his robe. Suddenly he took out his watch, opened it, and began to look at it, which greatly surprised Hannah. The girl looked with a surprised look and did not understand why Alan was counting down. When he counted to 0, he shouted joyfully that the time was up. He went to rest and shouted to Hannah that he was leaving everything to her, and tomorrow let her tell him everything. After some time, our hero reached the inn of a local village. The establishment was a bit empty. Alan came in and asked the owner to give him one room. The seemingly gloomy and tired man replied that it would cost 1 silver. Alan provided the currency, and the owner handed him the key to the room on the 2nd floor. When Alan took the key, he noticed a strange tattoo on the man's hand that looked like the tentacles of a black squid. Although this could be a clue, Alan decided that it did not matter because now it was his time to rest. When he got to his room, he lay down on the soft bed and thought about how Hannah was progressing in the investigation. After some time, the guy woke up due to a loud noise from below. The owner was telling someone that there was no room, and some girl was shouting that there was clearly no one here, and the owner was acting ugly. The guy jumped out of bed and was unhappy that someone woke him up. But Alan had already heard this screaming voice somewhere. It was Hannah, who offered 2 silver pieces for the room, but the owner still said that there were no more places. Suddenly, someone called the angry girl by name. Hannah was delighted to see her brother Alan, who told her not to torment the owner because he had already said that there was no room. The guy turned to the man and asked if his younger sister could spend the night in his room. The gloomy owner nodded, and Hannah was surprised at this proposal. The girl could not believe that she would spend the night with him in the same room. She was seized with panic. Alan walked up the stairs and told the stunned Hannah that if she didn't want to spend the night on the street, then she should follow him. Hannah was embarrassed. She had no choice but to follow the guy. Alan walked slowly, and the girl followed him like a very quiet mouse. She was worried and thought that they would not do anything that would make her ashamed later. In addition, the girl is much stronger than him, and will be able to stand up for herself. A few minutes later they came to the room where Alan was eating cookies, and Hannah was sitting quietly next to him. The guy asked the girl if she had dinner. He handed her a plate of cookies and asked if the girl wanted to eat a little, to which Hannah replied that they should learn to abstain from food in order to strengthen their hearts. Only when your heart is strong can you. The girl didn't have time to finish speaking when Alan put a cookie in her mouth. The guy was wiping his hands of crumbs, and meanwhile Hannah was all red. Having swallowed the food, she ascended, tasting the sweet, but not greasy pastry, which melted in the mouth and gave off a little flour. It penetrated the girl's heart, making her want to drown in it. At that very moment, her sanity returned. She started screaming at Alan, scolding him for sneaking up on her with this cake. The guy, with a calm expression, turned to the girl and asked if it was delicious, to which she replied that she really liked the pastries. But there is no benefit from such food, so it is much better not to eat. But Alan did not agree with this statement. He asked his sister if she had ever wondered whether it was possible to walk by leaps and bounds, avoiding 5 vegetables, 3 flowers, and the bustle of the world. The 5 vegetables are vegetables that Buddhist monks do not eat, and the 3 colors are the 3 colors of the clouds, and Alan said that they should not be avoided. After all, they walk around this world, and even with all their desire, they cannot isolate themselves from everything in the world. Blind avoidance will only tire you physically and psychologically. You will be afraid of everything that makes practice difficult. The girl asked how then they could practice without giving up human desires. It's impossible. Alan replied that he thought that true monks were not afraid to face temptation and experience it themselves. As with these cakes, if you're afraid that their taste will disturb your mind, you should try to get used to them. When you learn to treat this as something completely ordinary and remain indifferent, this will be your first step towards real practice, and only with a pure heart will a girl be able to see the truth. Only in this case will she feel like a fish in water, free and natural. Lost in his thoughts, Alan opened his eyes slightly to look at the girl. She was in shock, and the guy realized that he had said too much, and apparently her brain had overheated. Suddenly the girl jumped up from her seat, shouting that she understood everything. Only by facing desire and then giving it up can she return to her true nature and experience the essence of the world. After these words, Hannah began to eat all the sweets that were on the table with great enthusiasm. Alan was shocked. Now all his sweets will go to the girl, and not to him. A little later, offended by Hannah, he said that today she would have to sleep on the floor, to which the girl grinned and replied that she would not sleep, but would just sit and meditate. And so it happened. Alan fell asleep in a cozy bed, and Hannah sat and meditated in the room. Suddenly an unfamiliar man approached the door to their room. The man took out something and said that he was ready to let this girl go. But now, unfortunately, he will have to end her life. After which he placed a strange incense in front of their door. Hannah continued to meditate, and the smoke from the incense gradually began to fill the entire room. The girl opened her eyes slightly. It seemed strange to her that she felt some kind of aroma. At that same second, she realized that she was surrounded by a mysterious fog that was penetrating more and more into their room. Hannah realized that it was poison from which there was no escape. Suddenly her body began to become heavier, and her face became covered with sweat. A few moments later the girl fell to the floor, exhausted. All she could do in her current state was to whisper for Brother Alan to run away as soon as possible. However, the guy was lying on the bed and a strange aura was concentrated around him. It seemed that the guy was completely unaffected by the poison and was simply watching the girl. Hannah's vision gradually began to dim, and she eventually closed her eyes and lost consciousness. Meanwhile, a secret meeting took place in the forest outside the village. The man told the master that the disciples of the Sword Clan were knocked down by him with the help of the aroma of a broken spirit. One of the students is Hannah, the best student of the clan, and the identity of the second is unknown to him, but the girl called him Brother Alan. The unknown figure with red eyes said that he did not expect such a weakling to defeat Hannah. As for this Alan, the gentleman has never heard of him. He must be someone insignificant. A gloomy figure appeared. It was a hooded man with a scar on his cheek who had bright, expressive red eyes. He said that his servant did a great job this time. The owner of the inn began to sob and ask about his wife and children. The gloomy unknown person reassured the old man and told him not to worry because they were alive and well. Right now he would take him to them. The owner of the inn was delighted at the gentleman's mercy and began to thank him. But at the same moment, the old man's chest was struck by lightning, which killed him on the spot. The gloomy hooded man laughed and shouted that this was the last victim and everything was about to end. Having finished laughing, he called out to the third and fourth, who immediately landed behind the man. He ordered them to go to the inn and capture the 2 swordsman clan disciples. Meanwhile, dear Hannah began to gradually come to her senses and open her eyes. She lay on the bed, and Alan sat next to her and waited for the girl to wake up. Suddenly Hannah stood up abruptly and began shouting that they needed to run away from here because it was dangerous here. Alan still sat with a calm expression and looked at the frightened girl. Her sanity gradually began to return, and she began to realize how ridiculous she now looked. She asked Alan why he was okay because he should have lost consciousness before her. The guy replied that when he sleeps, unlike Hannah during meditation, he does not use spiritual power, so the aroma of a broken spirit did not affect him at all. But Alan had to remain still for a long time for the scent to dissipate, and Hannah came to her senses. In fact, It is difficult for monks below the 5th level of the Purple Palace to resist this poison. Alan told the girl that her social experience was too small, and she should be more careful. If she had gone on the mission herself, the consequences would have been catastrophic. The girl bowed before Alan and thanked him for saving her. In the future she swore that she would be more careful. Meanwhile, the guy brewed aromatic tea. He handed her tea and told her to drop politeness and drink some tea and warm up. Hannah was very embarrassed, feeling guilty about the incident, but thanked her brother Alan for the drink. There are rumors that brother Alan is just an ordinary lazy person who doesn't know how to do anything and doesn't strive for anything. But Hannah never expected that he would not only say a few words to her, but also reveal the secrets of cultivation. All this time he was so attentive to everything, even saved her life, excellent character, pleasant appearance. It's a pity that his level is not enough. Immediately the girl shuddered and caught herself thinking that she should not think about such things. Alan, meanwhile, turned to her and asked how she was feeling. The girl laughed and thanked the guy for his concern, saying that she was fine. Meanwhile, a strange purple flash appeared in the night sky. 2 unknown fighters, overflowing with power, were heading straight towards the room where Alan and Hannah were. The best student immediately sensed the approach of the enemy. She pushed the guy aside and pulled out her sword, shouting that the killer was coming right here. Hannah turned to her brother Alan and told him to hide. There was no need to force Alan. He was already heading to his bed and said that since Hannah was already better, she should deal with it herself, because his working hours were over. Hannah went to the killers because anyway, these two are much stronger than brother Alan, and if he gets involved, there will only be more problems. The girl was left alone with her opponents, and was already waiting for their approach on the street. She gripped her blade tightly, and shouted that it was no coincidence that they came here. A huge blue whirlwind created by Hannah's sword rushed towards the opponents, and knocked down their flight path. 2 unknown people landed with a crash in the nearby forest. The sophisticated girl instantly landed where a dark aura wafted from the ground. Standing in front of her were 2 people from the 4th clan of the Eastern Wasteland, the Purple Spirit Clan. Hannah didn't understand why the Purple Spirit Clan's disciples attacked them, so she asked what they were doing here. But they didn't answer, and their eyes looked especially strange. They were black. These 2 were bloody puppets. Their souls were consumed by magic, turning them into weak-willed dolls. This is the magic of the demon sect. Apparently the disappearance of an entire village is also their doing. The strength of these 2 is equivalent to the 3rd or 4th level of the Purple Palace, and you need to be careful. Hannah, covered in blue chakra, slowly landed and said that they upset her. The girl took out her striking blade and summoned her sword technique. Then she used a powerful ability. Clouds breaking the moon and everything around began to fly into pieces. A powerful wave created by the sword headed towards the opponents, but the girl and the guy were able to deftly jump away and dodge her attack. However, this was not the end, and Hannah commanded her blade to dissipate. After this, the blue blade immediately split into 2 parts and flew towards the enemies. The targets were immediately hit, and small flashes from the explosions ran through their bodies. The cut and beaten fighters lost their strength and fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Alan watched the battle. He was surprised how Hannah was able to easily separate the light from the sword, but apparently the force of the blow has also decreased. By the way, it's much more convenient to watch the fight this way. You don't even need to open your eyes. However, these 2 definitely did not plan to give up so easily. With difficulty the girl rose to her hands and tried to stand up. She called Hannah sick and said she couldn't do that to them. The best student realized that these guys had not completely become bloody puppets. Apparently there was still a trace of self-awareness in their heads. The subordinate girl got angry and shouted that she would kill Hannah for what she did to them. She jumped towards the girl and swung her staff, concentrating her purple chakra. The 2 girls clashed in battle. Hannah was able to block the staff's attack in time with her sword. However, the block was not easy for her. Hannah was surprised that her opponent could wield such a formidable weapon so easily. The enraged girls continued to attack each other, but no one wanted to give in. The air around them became electrified. The blows became faster and faster, so much so that at one moment their outlines were difficult to discern. Hannah could not understand what kind of strength her opponent had. The girl's hands even went numb from such blows, and the purple girl continued to attack and twirled her staff over her head to again try to defeat her rival. She gathered a huge amount of chakra and shot a magical stream towards Hannah. Meanwhile, Hannah realized that everything was about to end. Her sword was also charged for the next attack. Alan was happy for the girl, because in such a short time she managed to study her opponent, which was to be expected from the best student. Even though they are on the 4th level of the Purple Palace, now they are just puppets. Their consciousness is sealed, so they can only fight with the help of instincts. Hannah closed her eyes and tried to concentrate to gather all her chakra for one powerful blow. A powerful stream of mana formed around the girl, which was so huge that it went like a column into the sky. Seeing such power, the purple girl was afraid. But Alan was worried about Hannah, because it seems his sister is unaware of the danger. The guy took in his hand a leaf of a tree that flew into his window and decided that this would be enough. After gathering enough chakra, Hannah summoned her striking sword technique. She drew her sword, and a powerful wave of energy was sent at the speed of sound towards the purple girl. She tried to protect herself by forming a shield with her chakra. However, the shield was too weak compared to the enormous chakra power that the best swordsman student had summoned. After the battle, the purple girl lay in a pile of collapsed rocks, and Hannah was thinking about how to quickly rid these fighters of the spell. But the beauty did not notice that behind her, the second fighter raised his fan. He waved his weapon and immediately a purple lightning, sharp as a needle, rushed towards the girl's back. Hannah turned around because she realized what had happened, but it was already too late. She only managed to create a small shield and tried to protect herself. However, the shield was too weak and thin and the purple blade easily broke the defense and was aimed straight at the girl's eyes. But suddenly a leaf that flew in like lightning repelled the attack and changed the trajectory of the blow, protecting Hannah. The purple blade flew past the girl's head and crashed into the mountain, creating a huge explosion there. The wind blew and blew her beautiful hair, and for a moment she realized that someone had just saved her. One of the purple warriors was sitting in front of the girl, and she knew that if she missed such a blow, the injury would be very serious. But she didn't know what kind of green light it was that saved her life, and she still has to find out. Hannah approached the enemy with lightning speed and went behind his back. She hit the guy's neck with the hilt of her sword and easily knocked him out. After some time, the girl returned to Alan's room and sat the two prisoners on chairs, who were unconscious. Alan praised the student, saying that she was able to cope with everything successfully. But the girl was haunted by one question. She tried to ask about him, but the guy immediately said that he had been lying in the room all this time. Then he smiled carefree and asked what happened and what was bothering her so much. The girl shrugged it off and replied that nothing had happened, but she herself thought that with his level he would hardly be able to do something like that, so there's no point in asking Alan about it. She also said that while the spirit of these guys is still alive, they should hurry up and return them to the clan. They need to ask the elders to cleanse their hearts and expel the evil formation from them so that they stop being puppets. But if they leave, the demon clansmen will run away and do their dirty deeds elsewhere. Alan stood up and said that for the sake of the people and the 3 days off, he would try to do something. Hannah was surprised that the guy began to concentrate chakra and asked what exactly he was going to do. Alan replied that he would use his divine sense to penetrate their minds and expel the formation. Hannah panicked and shouted that the guy was crazy because this is a very difficult practice. The slightest carelessness can lead to complete destruction of the soul. The guy calmed her down, asking her not to worry, and extended his hands to the heads of the prisoners. But seeing this, Hannah panicked even more because he wants to turn them from puppets at the same time, and this is even more difficult. Alan answered her that saving a person is tantamount to putting out a fire, the faster the better. A little time passed, and the purple girl opened violet eyes that were once black. Her brother was happy that Sarah had finally woken up. The girl began to rub her tired eyes, trying to wake up completely. But then her consciousness finally returned to her, and she turned towards our heroes. Seeing Alan and Hannah, she asked if they were students of the Sword Clan. Hannah formally greeted Sarah and introduced herself, as well as her companion Alan. The brother began to calm the girl down, saying that this was the best student of their clan, and they saved them. The guys were able to rescue them from the traps set by the elder of the demon clan. Alan asked Sarah to tell us in more detail how this happened. The girl bowed her eyes and began to tell this sad story. A week ago, he and Brian, on orders, went to the village to investigate the disappearance of residents. They asked around and traced it to a strange place in the forest. In it, the elder of the demon clan used the blood of the villagers for a sacrifice. In the end, they fell into a trap that he had prepared in advance. All these demons and images created by the elder suppressed the consciousness of the fighters. They ended up becoming puppets of the elder, and could do nothing more about it. Therefore, the first thing Sarah did was to thank her new friend for saving her. Hannah began to wave her off and tell the girl not to thank her. After all, she didn't do anything, but the one who saved the guys was this lazy brother Alan. Sarah turned towards Alan and thanked him, saying that they would definitely repay their debt. Hannah stood shyly behind the carefree guy and thought about what happened. He had just managed to free 2 people from the curse of the bloody puppet at once. It happened so quickly that it seemed as if he didn't even bother, surprising his best student. Usually this spell affects the deepest corners of consciousness. Getting rid of it without harming a person is like finding a needle in a haystack. Not even all elders manage to get rid of it. After using the technique, Hannah immediately asked Alan when he was able to master such a complex technique. The guy replied that earlier he was whiling away time in the Elder's Pavilion and accidentally came across a fragment of a scroll of practices for manipulating spiritual thoughts. He found it very interesting, so he studied it. The information amazed Hannah more and more. He even found not a whole scroll, but just a fragment, and was able to learn such a technique. Suddenly her memories were interrupted by Alan, who said that in order to save the guys he needed to use resources and artifacts almost worth 30,000 high-grade spirit stones. The girl puffed out her cheeks angrily, thinking that the guy probably did it by accident, and he would never have had that much courage. Sarah looked at Alan and realized that he was far from stupid. Therefore, she happily agreed to make up for everything as soon as they returned to their clan. Hannah was amazed that they actually agreed, while Alan smiled triumphantly. It is now recognized that the formation of purifying the heart and destroying evil that can dispel the spell of the bloody puppet requires at least 50,000 stones, so 30,000 is a good price for friendship. Alan made a nice face and asked them not to rush because their clans were friends with each other, so it was their duty to help them. He also asked the 2 to remember the details of their abduction. Sarah said that the man's name is Lloyd. His combat power is not very great, and she could cope with him on her own. But he is very good at using formations and poisons, which is why the couple was able to get caught so easily. Alan delighted them by saying that if this is the case, then he has a special elixir that can make them immune to poisons for 3 hours. He will give it to the 3 fighters and they will defeat the elder. Sarah's morale increased and she shouted that if she was immune to the poisonous incense, she would kill this opponent in a matter of minutes. But then she again remembered all the words that Alan said. She asked why only the 3 of them would go. Would Alan really stay here and not go with them? The guy bowed his head and replied that he actually needed too much spiritual power to save them. Therefore, he will have to sleep to recover. While Hannah could barely restrain herself from punching this lazy guy, the purple couple apologized, saying that they were too blind to see brother Alan's hard work. They decided that the 3 of them would cope while Alan rested. Meanwhile, Hannah realized that the lazy man had again deceived everyone in order to do nothing. After some time, a new team set out to search for the demon elder. Sarah looked at the small blue sphere and asked if this was really the magic elixir that brother Alan was talking about. Hannah told her that they should believe him because he had already saved them several times. After these words, all 3 fighters took the magic pill. Sarah noticed that the elixir melted pleasantly in the mouth, and was no different from ordinary pills. Brian added that it was not that he did not trust Alan, but his level of cultivation was very low. The team continued to walk through the forest. The moon had already appeared in the sky and it became somehow too quiet around. Hannah took up her sword, noticing that something was wrong here. Brian confirmed her words by saying that there was not a single living soul here. Sarah began to panic. She guessed what had happened. An unknown gloomy voice confirmed their guesses, saying that they were on his territory. Hannah reacted to the enemy with lightning speed and sent a whirlwind of sword in his direction. The whirlwind blades immediately struck several eyes. But there was nothing on that side. The tree crowns dispersed, and she saw a strange swamp that was not there. Brian assumed that these were parts of dead creatures that were dealt with here. Hannah asked if the boys had seen the person who had just spoken to them, but suddenly a gloomy figure in a cloak standing behind the girl answered her that he was here. The elder of the demon clan, Lloyd, drove the prey into his trap. The heroes turned around, and Sarah shouted that it was the one who caught them then. Lloyd asked how they managed to get rid of his curse so quickly. Apparently the best student of the Sword Clan has secret treasures that can lift his curse. Lloyd was also wondering why there were only 3 fighters. He assumed that one of them was scared when he found out that he was behind all this. Sarah got angry and shouted to the villain that Alan was not here, because she could handle such a dummy herself. After these words, the girl directed her first attack at Lloyd, and the battle began. The stones on the ground where the impact occurred began to crumble, mixed with purple energy. In this dust raised from the ground, Sarah tried to see where her enemy was. In the middle of the dark fog, Lloyd appeared, who told the girl that she had already lost, she had fallen for his trick. Brian immediately appeared behind the demon and shouted to the man that he was no longer a tenant. Swinging his fan, he aimed his needle-sharp spell at Lloyd's head, but he easily repelled it by saying that although they are the best students of their clans, they are still fools. Then he smiled and asked if they liked the smell. Brian and Sarah immediately realized that right now they were inhaling poison. Hannah also did not stand aside and attacked the dark bubble in which Lloyd was located. The master just as easily repelled her attack while continuing to taunt them, but suddenly he noticed that the blue lightning did not dissipate. She, like a swift wind, continues to break through his dark bubble. Eventually, the blade's whirlwind broke through Lloyd's defenses and an explosion was heard. 3 fighters were already in the air and were waiting for their opponent. The dust from the explosion cleared and Hannah saw a small hole where Lloyd was standing. She became angry realizing that they had missed the villain. But at that very second the air turned scarlet, and a dark fog formed around the heroes. It was poisonous incense. Lloyd emerged from the poisonous fog, and he really had his own tricks. The master hung in the air right above our heroes and sprayed his crimson mist. He laughed, and shouted that it was useless for the soldiers to run away anywhere because they had already inhaled his poison. It only takes 10 breaths and they will immediately turn into bloody puppets and become his faithful servants. However, nothing happened and the guys stood and smiled. At that moment Lloyd realized that something was wrong, and then he realized that he was missing the 3rd fighter, who was already swinging his huge staff behind the master's back. Sarah took advantage of the moment and hit Lloyd on the back. The force of the blow was colossal, and the master immediately spat out a lot of blood. Then he rushed towards the ground at the speed of sound until he crashed into it. Brian also wanted revenge. He prepared his fan to finish off the enemy. Swinging his weapon, several sharp chakra needles rushed towards the prone Lloyd. The purple needles mercilessly hit their opponent in all places of his body. The demon elder bled, his most terrible weapon no longer working. He could hardly stand on his hands and bled while trying to understand how this happened. The master raised his bloody gaze to the team. He did not find an answer to his question, so he asked them why his poison did not work on them. And the squad of fighters only mocked the once strong villain. Sarah was happy that Alan's elixir was really so strong. Resistance to poisons would help them deal with all the members of the demon sect. Lloyd knew that this poison was even stronger than the previous one, and even if you held your breath it would be absorbed into the skin, and nothing short of his special antidote can dispel it. Then why doesn't he take these warriors? Apparently they have some kind of secret of their own. Hannah said it was time to finish with him and prepared to use her sword technique. But Lloyd was not going to give up so easily. He wiped his blood and said that this was far from over. The demon elder immediately jumped and took off from the ground. Having covered a great distance with lightning speed, he said that the game had just begun. Flying into the sky, he summoned the bloody flames of the heavenly formation and covered the entire area below him. The girls who got into the area panicked and tried to understand what was happening. Lloyd scoffed and reminded them that they had entered his territory. He ordered the first to get rid of them, and at that very second something began to form from the dirt behind them. Brian turned in horror to see a man began to form from the mud. A powerful, angry demon who was ready to tear everyone apart. The team realized that this was the bloody puppet of the 6th level of the Purple Palace. Lloyd continued to taunt, telling the guys that they would definitely not be returning home today. Speaking of the house, Lloyd sent the second one there. He has the 5th level of the Purple Palace, and he will deal with the coward who is hiding there. Hannah immediately began to worry about Alan, because he was too weak to cope with such an opponent. Meanwhile, Alan was sleeping peacefully and was not at all interested in the outcome of the battle, and a terrible demon with 6 eyes had already entered his house through the window. But to his surprise he found no one on the bed, and there was not a soul in the house. Sly Alan was lying in the next room and had absolutely no intention of working overtime. He turned to go to sleep, but immediately an explosion thundered behind him. It was a trap that Alan had left for the demon, but to his surprise the enemy was not torn apart, and there was a silhouette behind him. It was a demon who was struggling in agony and screaming, because he had received many injuries. Actually no, the trap was too weak for him, Alan had to get out of bed. He realized that the demon would not be able to return until he caught him. The guy didn't understand whether it was really necessary to involve him in all this. Meanwhile, a fierce battle broke out in the forest. Hannah concentrated her power and used her sword technique to create a hurricane of water. Meanwhile, the bloody puppet began to form a cloud of energy to repel the attack. Then he put up an impenetrable shield, and the blades of water crashed into it without causing damage. But suddenly Sarah appears behind the monster, who took advantage of the situation and the fact that the enemy was distracted. The girl tried to attack him with her staff, but the bloody puppet successfully blocked the blow. The monster then took hold of Sarah's staff, and with a powerful movement of his hand he threw the girl away from him. Brian was angry and summoned one of his techniques, the sealing purple chains. Approaching from behind, the sealing chains seemed to have successfully begun to bind their enemy. But the monster was not so weak. He gathered his energy and began to scream with all his might. The chains that bound him broke, but Hannah managed to take advantage of the moment and strike the body of the immobilized enemy. The girl was focused and confident that this time she succeeded. Indeed, the monster's body was cut into 2 parts. People cannot survive such wounds, but the bloody puppet had nothing to do with it. After separation, he immediately landed on his severed part and fused together. Hannah couldn't believe her eyes when she saw this. Meanwhile, the monster decided to attack his opponents and jumped towards them. The first to be hit was Brian, who immediately flew away, covered in blood. Then Hannah was attacked and was also unable to evade. Sarah, noticing the loss of her comrades, immediately shouted their names. Blood was leaking from under Brian's head. Seeing this, Sarah became angry. No one could touch her brother. The girl jumped from her seat with lightning speed and landed behind the bloody monster. Her rage gave her strength, and she was able to hit the monster's back with her staff. However, the monster that received the blow jumped away from her to a safe distance. This time was enough for Hannah to come to her senses. The girl landed next to Sarah and said that this guy is so strong that with his endless regeneration, they will simply fizzle out over time. Sarah said with a serious face that she had a secret way to destroy him. Hannah was happy because there was hope, but Sarah needed time to gain strength. So the purple girl asked Hannah to buy her some time. The best student prepared for battle, saying that she could rely on her. Lloyd taunted them by saying that if they have any aces up their sleeves, then let them use them now. These puppets are a masterpiece of his collection of bloody techniques, so they will all come to an end soon. Suddenly the master felt something strange. Number 2 did not move, and the master thought that apparently he had finished with the coward too quickly. However, everything was not so simple. The bloody puppet was tied with Alan's blue bonds. The guy looked at the bloody puppet and said that the elders should under no circumstances find out about this. But he just wanted to sleep peacefully without any unnecessary noise. And if the puppet does not do this, then he will give her something in return. After these words, Alan immediately grabbed the puppet by the hair. He slowly walked to the window holding the monster by the hair. The guy looked into the distance, where a fierce battle was breaking out, and saw only a strange red dome. Brother Alan raised the shackled bloody puppet like a spear and began to take aim. Then he threw the monster towards the dome with all his strength, and shouted at him to get back out and let him sleep. Because of such force of the throw, the monster flew into the sky so far that it was no longer visible. Alan, meanwhile, turned around and thought that he had a little more time to rest. He wanted to go see if there were still free rooms here because he needed to sleep a little more. Meanwhile, Hannah continued to gain time and many blows from the puppet flew at her. The girl tried to block the fists with her sword, but their strength was great, and Hannah's strength was decreasing, so the girl flew a short distance. She was all wounded, but she didn't really have a choice. The girl did not understand why this bloody puppet was becoming stronger and stronger. Lloyd told the girl that since she was still holding on, it was not for nothing that she was called the best student of the Sword Clan. But all this would soon end. He ordered his first blood puppet to attack the girl. The monster immediately obeyed and attacked Hannah with great speed. He gathered furious energy around himself and jumped into the air above the girl. Hannah closed her eyes and mentally asked everyone for forgiveness because for the first time in her life she was afraid. But suddenly, behind Lloyd, some strange red flash appeared in the sky. Lloyd felt something was wrong and turned around. At that moment a red object was rushing towards him at the speed of sound. The bloody monster thrown by Alan crashed into the bloody barrier like a bullet and pierced through it. Hannah and the demon elder were stunned by this turn of events. When the dust from the fall cleared, they saw the second and first bloody puppet, which were broken and lying in a pile of dirt. Only now did Lloyd realize what had happened, and he was furious. He couldn't believe that this was even possible. And Hannah was glad that if the second puppet was here, then everything was all right with Brother Alan. Apparently one of the elders came and was able to protect the guy. Lloyd thought the same thing, and he knew that if the elders came here, it could become a problem for him. Therefore, he must hurry and finish the fight as quickly as possible. The master used the ability to enhance the bloody puppets, and the monsters came to life again. One of the puppets recovered and jumped on the defenseless Hannah. The girl tried to take a defensive stance, but her feet got stuck in the mud created by the monster. But Sarah came to the girl's aid in time, and apologized for the fact that the student had to wait for her for so long. Sarah's eyes were filled with rage. They shimmered with a purple light similar to sparks of true thunder. Lloyd was shocked to see the fourth level of the Purple Palace. This girl cannot resist him. However, Sarah used the purple shadow technique and easily blocked the blood puppet's attack. Her power was so great that the explosion from the staff was visible from a long distance, so far that the purple glow even reached sleeping Alan. But the guy was ready for this, and his night mask did not let the light through. Morning came, and our main lazy man calmly got out of bed. He went to the window to enjoy the fresh air and the rays of the just risen sun. It seemed like this was how every good morning should begin. But not everything was so wonderful. A huge explosion in the distance disturbed the landscape, and Alan thought that today was some kind of explosive day. Apparently Sister Hannah and the others fought all night long. This elder turned out to be not such an easy opponent. Alan slowly put his hand into his pocket. He took out his watch to see what time it was. It was time to work. Meanwhile, the girl stood near a large patch of mud. Everything in the area was destroyed, stones were crushed, and trees were uprooted. Charged, Sarah looked at the smoldering body of the bloody puppet. Suddenly the girl fell to her knees, exhausted. They had been fighting all night and were pretty exhausted. Hannah, looking at Sarah trembling in pain, told her that her technique was indeed very powerful. Suddenly, Brian appeared behind her, who explained that this is their secret technique. The accumulated power breaks out in one breath. But the disadvantage of the technique is obvious. This technique is too energy-consuming. Sarah, who could hardly stand on her feet, said that this time everything worked out, and it was all thanks to Hannah. The bloodied girl shrugged it off, saying that she was just doing her job. Their pleasant exchange of pleasantries was interrupted by Lloyd, who shouted that they were three freaks. Exhausted, Sarah realized that the battle was not over yet. The main enemy remained. The furious master said that the team had practically destroyed number 1, which he had spent several decades creating. Sarah barely raised her staff in preparation for battle, but her brother said that there was no need to try to fight because the girl's spiritual power was almost exhausted. Suddenly Hannah said that she would take on this opponent because she had rested a little while Sarah was fighting the monster. The powerful warrior began to accumulate her energy for an attack. Lloyd also began to form bloody hands, shouting that the trio of them would be buried here today. Powerful hands made of dark matter aimed at the small, fragile girl. Hannah used her sword technique, and a stream of water like a whip burst out from his blade. The blade, as powerful as a needle, pierced the black magic of the demon elder. Moving further, it reached a place where a gap had formed in the dome, and the claws created by Lloyd in the meantime almost achieved their goal. But it was not for nothing that the girl was the best student. She cut the bloody magic into small pieces with lightning speed. Lloyd glared at Hannah, noting that she was quite strong. He was wondering if the girl could handle his other technique. However, the dome on which Lloyd stood suddenly began to crack. Then it simply burst, crumbling into thousands of small fragments. Only now did Lloyd realize that the girl was aiming at the previously made hole. The master did not expect that Hannah would have the strength to do something like this, but he was not going to give up, after which the master suddenly shot himself right in the head. He absorbed the power of the dome and his blood magic completely into his body. Having squeezed the blood to the limit, the master summoned a pentagram, which he filled with the remnants of his power. Hannah realized that things were bad. It was obvious that the master wanted to use a secret technique, but suddenly her impulse was stopped by drops of blood that hit the girl in the back. The demon elder sealed her acupuncture points to release spiritual energy. But that was not all. The faces of the purple allies were also subjected to a strange bloody attack. Then the allies opened their eyes, and Hannah saw that they had turned black. The master's bloody puppet technique was not so easy to dispel, as it turned out. The demon elder ordered number 3 and number 4 to capture the disciple. Lloyd told her that although she was talented, she was like a little child in front of him. But such power should not be wasted, so Hannah will become his new number 1. The master summoned his bloody hand to apply the seal and said that her blood would make a wonderful offering. The claws rushed towards Hannah, and the girl mentally apologized to the elders for the fact that their best student was defeated by the devil's spawn. The sweet beauty burst into tears, remembering her brother Alan, because she promised him to be careful. The claws almost reached their goal, but suddenly someone shouted at him to stop. A man hung behind Lloyd and ordered the master to let the girl go. The elder of the demons turned around, and the tearful Hannah immediately recognized the hero. Lloyd didn't understand where the guy came from here. He began to look around, assuming that the same elder who killed number 2 was here. Brother Alan told the master not to look back because the guy came alone. Hannah began to panic and screamed for Brother Alan to run as fast as he could because he couldn't defeat him. Lloyd smiled. He knew that Alan was not his opponent. Since the guy came himself, the master decided to start with him first. Carefree Alan snapped his fingers and said one word: destruction. At that same second, Lloyd was attacked by purple energy that came out of nowhere. He couldn't believe what just happened. Number 3 appeared behind him and used her magical powers. This was impossible. Lloyd's reactivated blood puppet formation was several times stronger than normal. No matter how powerful Alan was, it could not be easily dispelled. However, everything was like that, and Brian, who had regained his sanity, had already directed his technique of sealing chains at the enemy. The guy's sister also did not stand aside and was already waving her staff behind the chained Lloyd. The girl shouted to the old man to get down to the ground, and after these words she slammed him into the dirt with a strong blow. Bloody smoke emanated from the resulting crater where Lloyd landed. Hannah turned to her lazy brother and looked at him blankly. The girl was shocked by what he just did. How is it that the weakest sword master was able to defeat the elder of the demon clan with just a snap of his fingers? Sarah asked Brother Alan what exactly he did. The guy replied that it was just a little trick that he had thought out in advance. It all started when he extracted the bloody seed from the bodies of the 2. He discovered that his rhizomes struck the depths of the children's souls. Alan was afraid of damaging them and therefore extracted only the seed. The sharp blades of the sword cut the seed around the rhizome like thin branches. This meant that they could still be manipulated at any time because the root was still sealed in their souls. Therefore, Alan left several threads of the sword in their minds. As soon as the elder of the demon clan tries to activate the seed again, the threads will stop his attempt. At a critical moment, this could turn the tide of the battle. The purple warriors immediately bowed their heads and thanked Alan, saying that they admired him. Hannah asked why Alan didn't tell her about this, in case the plan would have failed. The guy replied that everything worked out for the girl in the end, but she was already starting to get upset, feeling useless. Then he encouraged her by saying that if it weren't for her, nothing would have worked out for him. After all, Hannah is the very person who can defeat the elder of the demon clan. An enthusiastic girl asked if the guy was lying. Alan, meanwhile, thought that if he had told her everything, then perhaps the girl would not have had enough acting skills to fool this elder. Sarah also supported Hannah, saying that if it weren't for her, they would not have been able to deal with the master so easily. The best student was delighted and agreed with everyone, and Alan shook his head affirmatively. The girl looked at the guy and thought that despite his low level, his wisdom, strategic thinking and insight were excellently developed. Alan, meanwhile, recalled that he decided to quickly cope with this work in order to go on vacation ahead of schedule. But suddenly they heard a loud rumble and felt powerful chakra. The bloody formation was activated again, which meant that the battle was not over yet. The elder was still alive and right now bloody energy was gathering around him. Alan was disappointed. He knew that early leaves sounded too good to be true. The tortured, scarred elder was on his knees and trying to get up. His bloody creations began to rise, and something began to emerge from the man's body. Alan watched all this from above, and did not understand what he was doing. A spear covered in black runes slowly began to emerge from the demon elder's belly. Hannah realized that things were bad and she needed to stop the appearance of the object, so she used her secret technique. The laughing villain meanwhile rose to his feet and grabbed his spear. The girl used the sword-breaking technique. Many lightning bolts rushed towards the master, but he only laughed and said that it was too late. He raised his dark spear, and Hannah's attack was immediately blocked with ease. The elder smiled ominously and said that his formation was complete. The girl did not know what to do, This was her last chance to destroy the enemy because she no longer had any strength left. At that very second, Brian said that it was time to retreat because their strength was not enough to fight the master. Hannah agreed to this and the trio tried to escape. However, Alan said that the guys should leave first, and he would catch up with them later. Hannah turned around and asked what the guy was waiting for. She needed to leave quickly. But Lloyd didn't want to just let them go. He summoned a huge projection that stretched its hands towards the heroes. In a split second, the summoned monster grabbed all 4 heroes in a tight grip. Lloyd shouted that now he would show these pathetic insects the power of real poison. Sarah said that the master was able to catch her because her strength had run out, and Brian had lost all hope after realizing that the elder was invincible. Hannah looked at the monster, and could not understand how he instantly jumped from the 5th level of the Purple Palace to the 8th level. Sarah didn't want to die like that, and her brother suggested that he became so strong because he absorbed his puppets. Lloyd told them that number 1 and number 2 were the best in his collection, and he didn't even think that the trio could beat them. Sarah said that even if number 1 was stronger than them, they could definitely cope with number 2. But now these 3 are one. Lloyd laughed, and told the team that he was also a victim. He said that he was forcibly raised into a bloodthirsty soldier. Then he raised his staff and it began to call for something. The guys did not understand what the master's words meant. Meanwhile, only one hero was not interested in the fight. He looked at his watch, and Hannah asked him what he was doing. Brian said that the ancient books say that demon warriors first appeared 10,000 years ago. Countless decent people were beheaded, and most of the lands began to belong to the demon clan. And only when the 5 clans united among themselves to resist them were they able to defeat the demon clan's troops and put an end to this disaster. Lloyd laughed again. He said that he had witnessed many things. He had seen blood spilled, souls taken by force. All of this helped shape warriors like him. And today the team of heroes has the honor of becoming an offering for his bloody formation. But suddenly his solemn speech was interrupted by a disgusting sound. Lloyd didn't understand what the sound was, and Alan, meanwhile, was looking at his watch. His working hours are over and apparently he will have to work overtime. Lloyd did not understand the guy's words and asked him what it meant to work overtime. At that same second, a huge wave of energy flew towards the invincible demon elder. A powerful flow of chakra immediately knocked the master out of the summoned formation. The weakest student told Lloyd that his hour of death had come.